It came without warning, as things often do in life. One moment, everything was fine, and the next, it wasn't. I was sitting at my desk at work, the hum of the office around me a steady, comforting rhythm. The phone call changed all that. I had been busy with the usual grind, meeting deadlines, answering emails, doing everything to keep my life moving forward. The phone rang, and I didn't recognize the number, but I answered it anyway, half expecting it to be a telemarketer or another one of those survey calls. "Hello." I spoke, my tone casual, distracted. "Mr. Walker?" The voice on the other end was calm, but serious, a woman's voice. "I'm afraid I have some tragic news. I'm calling from the hospital." My stomach churned, a feeling I couldn't place. I straightened up in my chair, suddenly alert. "Yes." My voice was sharp, more tense than I'd intended. "I'm so sorry to inform you, but your parents, they were in a car accident. They didn't survive." The world tilted beneath me, and for a moment, I thought I had misheard her. "What? No, there must be some mistake," I said, my throat tightening, the words barely escaping. She didn't hesitate, and there was no comfort in her words. "I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Walker. It was sudden. I'm afraid there's nothing we could do." The phone slipped from my ear. I stared at it, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. My parents. Gone. Just like that. I had never considered the possibility, never thought that this could be the moment that changed everything. My legs felt weak, and I had to grip the edge of my desk to steady myself. It was as though I had been struck by something invisible but brutally heavy. I stood up from my desk, the noise of the office, conversations, phones ringing, suddenly growing muffled as if I were underwater. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. I needed to breathe. I had always thought I would be prepared for something like this. After all, it's inevitable, right? People get older. Parents get sick. But this wasn't supposed to happen now, not like this. They'd just been here. Just a month ago, we had dinner together. I was too busy then to truly appreciate it. I had been caught up in my life, my work. I hadn't even called them much in the past few weeks. I should have been there more. The guilt hit harder than the shock. Why hadn't I made more of an effort to reach out? What if my last conversation with them had been a brief, "Hey, we'll catch up soon"? What if they had needed me, and I wasn't there? I grabbed my coat, still numb. My hand shook as I fumbled to zip it up, and the reality hit me again. They were gone. They wouldn't be there anymore. No more phone calls, no more Sunday dinners. I wanted to scream, to tell the universe that this wasn't fair, but I couldn't. The words didn't exist. I left the office, not bothering to explain to my colleagues. My mind wasn't on the trivial matters of the day. It was consumed with one thought. How could this be real? The drive to the hospital was a blur. I didn't remember how I got there or how long it took, only that the world outside the car seemed distorted. Red lights and street signs flashed past, but nothing felt real. I kept thinking that if I drove fast enough, I could outrun the grief that already set in, but it never worked. When I arrived at the hospital, everything was too quiet. The sterile smell of antiseptic and the sound of distant beeping machines greeted me. I walked numbly into the waiting room, looking for someone who could tell me more. The receptionist gave me a sympathetic look as she handed me a slip of paper with the details of where to go. It didn't help. The words on the page might as well have been in another language. I wasn't prepared for the heaviness of the situation. I wasn't prepared to face what was ahead. I could barely think straight as I walked down the sterile hallway toward the room where their bodies were waiting. I was still hoping, no, praying, that there had been some mistake, some horrible misunderstanding. But there was no mistake. The moment I saw them lying there, side by side, it hit me in a way that words can't describe. They looked so peaceful, so lifeless. Their faces were still, and for a moment, I felt as though I were standing in someone else's nightmare. They couldn't be gone. Not like this. Not so suddenly. I felt my knees buckle beneath me, but I didn't cry. I couldn't. My mind was too overwhelmed, too numb. I wanted to scream, to yell at the universe for taking them from me too soon. But all I could do was stand there, staring at the faces I had known my whole life. Faces that would never smile at me again. Faces that would never call to check in, never say, "I'm proud of you." The weight of the silence pressed down on me. The hospital room felt colder than it should have, and I realized that I would never hear their voices again. The world had shifted, and I was left to try and find my footing on ground that no longer felt solid. I called my brother, Ethan, though I knew it would be hard to get through to him. He lived out of town, and I was never sure if he would make it back in time. But I needed him. I needed someone. Ethan, it's Mom and Dad. I choked out when he finally picked up. They're gone. I could barely get the words out without breaking. My voice cracked, and for the first time since I received the call, the tears came. It was overwhelming. Wait, what? No. How? Ethan's voice was thick with disbelief. They were in a car accident, I managed to say. I need you here, man. I hung up and sat down in the sterile chair next to their beds, my head spinning. I had always tried to be strong, to be the dependable one. But now, I was faced with a reality that I couldn't control. They were gone. I was alone. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls, funeral arrangements, and empty conversations. My family came together, as they always do in times like this, but the air was thick with unspoken words. I saw Ethan at the funeral, his usual cocky demeanor replaced with something I couldn't quite place. There was no time to focus on that, though. There was only one thing on my mind: the will. It was scheduled for the day after the funeral. The lawyer had already been in touch, and I could feel the weight of the upcoming meeting hanging over me. My parents had always been private about money, so I never expected much. But the idea that I had been there for them, sacrificing so much and still might be left out, well, it didn't sit right with me. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I kept turning over in my mind how everything had unfolded. I had spent my life trying to be there for them, trying to prove that I could be the good son. I had worked for their well-being, put off my own dreams to help them. And now, they were gone, and I didn't even know where I stood. I wasn't expecting much, maybe a few keepsakes, a gesture of gratitude. But I never imagined that the moment the will was read, I would be facing the most shocking betrayal of my life. The day of the will reading arrived far too soon. I had barely slept the night before, my mind restless with 1,000 thoughts and fears. What if they had left something for me, something small to show they appreciated everything I'd done? What if they hadn't? What if this was all going to end with nothing, with me standing there, empty-handed, watching as my entire life's work went to Ethan, the golden child, the one who had always been the favorite? I arrived at the lawyer's office early. Ethan was already there, seated comfortably in one of the leather chairs, his usual smirk plastered across his face. His appearance didn't surprise me. He had always been the one to show up last minute at family events, always expecting the world to bend to his whims. But today felt different. There was something off about his casual demeanor, something that gnawed at the edges of my calm, though I couldn't quite place it. "Hey, you actually showed up," Ethan said with that same cocky grin. "Didn't think you'd make it." "Not exactly your scene, huh?" I didn't answer. I just nodded, my stomach twisting into knots. I had always been the responsible one, the one who kept things together, but today I felt like a stranger in my own life. The lawyer entered the room, a man I had met a few times over the years but never really got to know. He was in his 50s, with graying hair and a sharp, professional look that made him seem both comforting and distant at the same time. Mr. Walker, he began, looking between Ethan and me with a clipboard in hand. "I'm sorry for your loss. I know this is a difficult time for both of you." I didn't respond. My mouth felt dry, and my palms were clammy. Ethan, on the other hand, simply nodded, his expression as relaxed as ever. The lawyer cleared his throat and shuffled through a few papers before placing them on the table between us. "I'll keep this brief," he said. "Your parents were clear in their wishes, and I'll honor them. Their estate has been divided according to their instructions." He paused, and I braced myself. I had no idea what to expect, but something in my gut told me this wasn't going to be good. "First, the family home," he continued. "This will be transferred to Ethan Walker. The property, including the land and all assets, are to be given to him outright." My heart skipped a beat. Ethan? The house, the place I had spent my entire childhood in? The place where I had worked side by side with my parents, helping with repairs, making sure everything was in order? Gone. It was all going to Ethan. "Wait, what?" I managed to croak, the words escaping before I could stop them. "What about me?" Please, let me finish," the lawyer interrupted, his voice polite but firm. In addition to the house, all financial accounts, business assets, and investments will be transferred to Ethan. There is no mention of any inheritance for you, Mr. Walker. The estate has been allocated entirely to your brother. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was like the floor had just disappeared beneath me. All those years of hard work, all the sacrifices I had made, and in the end, I had nothing, not even a letter, not a single word of appreciation. I was left standing there, utterly empty. Ethan shifted in his seat, his smirk turning into a satisfied smile. "Well, that's that then, isn't it?" he said, leaning back in his chair with the kind of ease that made my skin crawl. I guess they knew who the better son was. I gritted my teeth. I wanted to scream, to lash out at him, but I couldn't. Not here, not now. Instead, I sat there, my hands clenched into fists, trying to keep my composure. I had always played the role of the responsible one, the one who held the family together, but this was too much. The lawyer continued reading, but I barely heard him. His voice became a blur of meaningless words, and all I could focus on was the fact that I had been cut out completely. The house I had helped build, the business I had helped sustain, was all in Ethan's hands now. My parents had been dead for less than a week, and already it felt like I had been erased from their lives completely. Finally, the lawyer finished his reading. There was nothing else, nothing more. No mention of me, no mention of anything I had done. Just Ethan and his inheritance. I stood up slowly, feeling a wave of nausea wash over me. The room seemed to tilt, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out. But I couldn't let that happen. Not now. Not in front of him. I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair, my hands still trembling. "You've got everything, Ethan," I said, forcing the words out through clenched teeth. "All of it. Everything." He didn't even look at me. He just leaned back, his fingers steepled in front of his face. "Yeah, I guess I do. And you? You get nothing. Just like I said you would." His voice was cold, condescending. "I'm the one who's always been their favorite. You never had a chance." I turned away, fighting the urge to lash out. I couldn't let him get to me. Not now. But the hurt, the betrayal, was almost too much to bear. How could they do this to me? How could my own parents treat me like this after everything I had done for them? I didn't say anything else. I couldn't. Instead, I walked out of the lawyer's office, my mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts, all of them leading to one crushing realization. I had nothing left. I had given my life to the family, and in the end, it wasn't enough. Ethan had won, and I had lost. I didn't know where to start. I felt hollow, empty, like a shell of the person I used to be. My parents were gone, and all the sacrifices I had made for them meant nothing. The will had cut me out, and Ethan, the golden child, now had control over everything. I had hoped for something, anything that would show I had been appreciated, but there was nothing, not a single mention of me. I went home that night, the weight of the world on my shoulders. The silence in my empty house was suffocating. I stood there in the doorway for a long time, trying to process it all. My parents were gone. Ethan had everything, and I had nothing. But then, as the anger slowly began to settle in, I realized something that gnawed at me. How had Ethan convinced them to leave everything to him? What was his hold over them? For years, I had worked tirelessly to support the family, to make sure my parents never needed anything. And yet, somehow, he had become the favorite, the one they entrusted with their legacy. I couldn't just let it go. I couldn't let him have everything without knowing how it all happened. What if there was more to the story? What if something wasn't right? I decided to dig deeper. I couldn't just walk away from this. The first place I went was the family business. My parents had run a small but successful property management company. I had worked alongside them for years, handling the accounts, making sure everything ran smoothly. Ethan, on the other hand, had always been the idea guy, the one who showed up when it was convenient and left when it wasn't. I spent hours at the office, digging through financial statements, bank records, and old contracts. It was tedious work, but I had to do it. I had to know what happened. And then I found it, hidden in a folder I hadn't noticed before, tucked away in a back cabinet. There were discrepancies, huge ones, money being transferred to accounts I didn't recognize, large sums of cash moving in and out of the business, Only, the money wasn't being used for the business. It was being moved elsewhere. I stared at the bank statements, my heart pounding in my chest. Something wasn't right. Ethan had been using the family business for something much more sinister. He had been siphoning money into other accounts that weren't registered under the business. And that wasn't all. There were transactions tied to international funds, wire transfers that led to offshore accounts. My blood ran cold. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Ethan hadn't just inherited the family wealth. He had been hiding something from everyone. The family money wasn't just being invested in real estate or stocks. It was being used to fuel illegal activities. Money laundering. It was all right there in front of me. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. My mind raced. How had I not seen this before? How had my parents missed it? And why hadn't I noticed the signs earlier? The more I uncovered, the worse it became. The transfers weren't just random. They were carefully planned. Ethan had been involved in shady real estate deals, selling properties to people who didn't exist. There were offshore companies and shell accounts, each one tied to a different part of the world. I could see it all now. A criminal empire built on the back of my parents' business. And I had been blind to it. I thought about confronting him. I thought about calling him out, about laying everything bare and letting the truth come to light. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't do it the way I had planned. If I exposed him, it wouldn't just ruin him, it would ruin everything. The family, the business, the legacy my parents had worked so hard to build. It would all come crashing down, and I wasn't sure I could bear it. I needed more. I needed the proof, the undeniable evidence that would make it impossible for Ethan to escape. I went back to the office the next day, determined to find the one thing that could prove his involvement beyond a shadow of a doubt. I spent hours looking through old contracts, invoices, and emails. Then I found it, a letter from an international company, one that had been doing business with Ethan for years. The letter was from a lawyer, and it detailed a secret transaction, one that had been kept hidden from the rest of the family. It was a deal for a large sum of money linked to a shady offshore account. And there, buried deep in the document, was Ethan's signature. He had been involved in these deals for years, long before our parents passed away. I leaned back in my chair, the full weight of the situation settling over me. Ethan hadn't just been involved in money laundering. He had been a mastermind behind it all. He had built an empire using our parents' wealth as a cover. And now I had the proof. I thought about everything I had lost, my parents, my childhood, the business I had worked so hard for, and I felt the rage building up inside me again. Ethan had stolen from me in ways I couldn't even comprehend. He had lied, manipulated, and used our family for his own gain. And now he was sitting in the mansion that should have been mine, the wealth that should have been mine, all of it his. I couldn't let him get away with it. But how could I expose him? How could I bring everything crashing down without losing everything in the process? I spent the next few days wrestling with the decision. I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what. I thought about going to the authorities, but I knew that would only make things worse. The family's reputation would be destroyed, and I would lose everything, just like I had with the will. Ethan would never let me win. He was too powerful, too connected. I couldn't just expose him without destroying myself in the process. But there was one thing I could do. I could fight back. I could take control of my life again. I could find a way to reclaim what was mine, what was rightfully mine, without tearing everything apart. As the days passed, the plan began to take shape in my mind. I didn't know how I was going to do it yet, but I knew one thing. Ethan wouldn't get away with this. Not while I still had breath in my body. And so I made my decision. I was going to expose Ethan, but not in the way anyone expected. I was going to take back what was mine, no matter what it took. The battle had only just begun. I knew I couldn't let it go. Not anymore. I had spent too many years in the shadows, putting my family first while my brother, Ethan, was handed everything without a second thought. The betrayal wasn't just about the will or the business or the inheritance. It was everything. The years of sacrifice, the constant undermining of my efforts, Ethan's manipulation. It all came rushing back, fueling a fire inside me that I had kept buried for far too long. I couldn't just let him take everything and walk away unscathed. He was a liar, a thief, and now, with the money laundering, a criminal. But even more than that, he was a symbol of everything I had worked against my whole life: entitlement, privilege, and an utter disregard for anyone who didn't serve his needs. I spent the next few days consumed with anger and frustration. I needed to act, but I had to be careful. One wrong move, and Ethan would use everything against me. He had already manipulated the entire family into believing I was the villain. They would never side with me. So I had to play it smart. The plan started to form slowly, a puzzle that I was carefully piecing together. I would need leverage, something he couldn't ignore, something that would bring him down without leaving me in ruins. I made a decision. I had to confront him, but not in the way I initially planned. It wasn't just about exposing him anymore. It was about taking back control of what was mine, our family legacy. The business was mine just as much as it was his. I had a right to it, and no one, least of all Ethan, could take that from me. But if I exposed him too early, I risked losing everything. So I would play the long game. I would bide my time, gather more information, and strike when he least expected it. That night, I decided to pay him a visit. I had been avoiding him ever since the will reading, but I knew I couldn't avoid him forever. I wasn't sure what I was going to say or how he would react, but I couldn't keep living in this state of limbo. I had to know where his head was at, what he was planning, and most importantly, what he thought I was capable of. His house. No, his mansion was just as ostentatious as I remembered. Everything about it screamed excess, a life built on privilege and deceit. The front gates were open, which I took as an invitation. I drove up the long, winding driveway, trying to steady my nerves. I had been here countless times before, but tonight felt different. Tonight, I wasn't the same person who had once respected him as family. I was something else now, someone who was ready to take control of their own life. I rang the doorbell, and after what felt like an eternity, the door swung open. Ethan stood there, as smug as ever. His smile was wide, almost mocking. He wasn't surprised to see me, but I could see the amusement in his eyes, as though he thought he had already won, as though nothing could touch him. Well, he said, stepping aside to let me in. Look who finally decided to show up. Come in. You don't have to stand out there like some stranger. I stepped inside, trying to keep my expression neutral. His house was even more lavish inside. Everything carefully curated to give off the impression of someone with power, with wealth. The truth was, it all seemed hollow to me now. None of this was earned. None of this was real. You're looking a little tense, Ethan remarked as we walked into the living room, where the walls were adorned with expensive art, and the furniture was so plush it looked like it belonged in a palace. Why are you doing this, Ethan? I asked before I could stop myself. My voice was colder than I had intended, but the words were out, and I couldn't take them back. The anger in me had reached a boiling point. Ethan gave me a quizzical look, his eyebrows rising. Doing what? All of this. I gestured around the room, the vast expanse of his mansion. How did you convince them to leave you everything? How did you manipulate them into thinking you deserved all this? I work for this family. I built this business. Ethan's expression shifted. The smirk faded just slightly, but I could see the defensive glint in his eyes. You're just mad because you didn't get what you think you deserve. You've always been like that, whining about what you didn't get, never satisfied with what you have. He leaned back against the couch, folding his arms. You always wanted more, didn't you? Always thought you were better than me. No, I replied sharply. I never thought I was better than you. I just thought I was part of this family. I didn't want anything more. I wanted what I was promised. I paused, letting my words sink in. But that's not the case, is it? You've been using our parents' business, Ethan, for years, and you've been covering it up. I found everything. The accounts, the transfers, the offshore dealings. You're a criminal. His eyes narrowed at that, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of real emotion in them. It wasn't guilt, though. It was fear. Fear that I had uncovered something he had worked so hard to keep hidden. For a moment, the mask slipped, and I saw him for what he truly was, a man who had built his life on lies and deceit. Where are you going with this? He asked, his voice a little quieter now, a little more guarded. I'm not going anywhere, I said, stepping closer. I'm just telling you that I know what you've done, and I'm not going to let you get away with it. Ethan chuckled, though it was strained. You don't think I'm just going to roll over and let you expose me, do you? I have everything. The family, the business, the power. You have nothing. I felt the rage well up again, but I kept my voice steady. Maybe I don't have everything, but I have something you'll never have. Control. I stared him down. I'm not going to expose you yet, but I will. And when I do, you'll wish you never crossed me. Ethan's face tightened. He stood up suddenly, but I didn't flinch. I had come this far, and I wasn't backing down now. You don't know what you're playing with, he hissed. I'm not some child you can just push around. I'll make sure you regret this. I turned on my heel, walking toward the door. I didn't need to stay any longer. The seed had been planted, and I had made my point. We'll see about that. I walked out of his mansion, my mind racing. The confrontation had been just the beginning. I knew he wouldn't let this go, but I was prepared. I had a plan, and it was just getting started. The fight for control wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. The following days were a blur of chaos and emotional turbulence. I couldn't stop thinking about the confrontation with Ethan. It was a moment of power, a moment where I finally took control, but it felt like a small victory in a battle that was only beginning. He was still out there, still holding the pieces of our family's legacy, and I knew he wouldn't take my threat lightly. I was sitting at my desk, staring at the files I had gathered on Ethan's illegal activities, when the phone rang. It was my mother. I hadn't heard from her since the funeral. She had been distant lately, but this time I knew something was wrong. I could feel it in my gut. Hello. I answered, trying to keep my voice calm. Where are you? My mother's voice came through, sharp and full of concern. Why haven't you called? Your father's side of the family is asking why you're not coming around anymore. And Ethan, he's been asking too. What's going on with you? Her words struck me like a slap. I had already been expecting some fallout from exposing Ethan's dealings, but hearing it from her, hearing the disappointment in her voice, it hit harder than I had imagined. Mom, you know exactly what's going on, I replied, trying to keep my composure, though I could feel the anger rising. Ethan is a criminal. He's been using our family's business to launder money. He's been hiding it from everyone. I didn't do this to hurt anyone. I did it to stop him before he drags us all down. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her trying to process my words. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer, but still tinged with disbelief. Ethan? A criminal? I can't. No, that's impossible. You must be mistaken. He's always been good to us. He's your brother. How could you turn on him like this? I felt my chest tighten. Her words cut deeper than anything Ethan had said. How could I turn on him? How could she not see what he had done? How could she not see the truth? I had given everything for this family, and in return, I was being treated like the enemy. The betrayal stung more than anything. I'm not turning on him, Mom, I said, my voice shaking with frustration. I'm trying to protect the family. Your family. You just don't see it. He's been manipulating all of us. Her tone hardened. I don't want to hear any more of this. You're just angry, and I understand that. But Ethan is family. Blood. And I won't have you tearing this family apart. The phone felt like a weight in my hand, too heavy to hold. I wanted to yell, to tell her everything I had uncovered, to show her the truth, but I knew it wouldn't matter. She was already too far gone, too blinded by Ethan's manipulation. I don't have time for this, I said, my voice colder now. I'm doing what I have to do. You can stand by him, but I won't. I hung up the phone without waiting for her response. The anger and betrayal flooded through me, but there was nothing left to say. She had made her choice, just like the rest of the family. Ethan had managed to weave his lies so well that they couldn't see the truth. The next few days felt like a relentless storm. I didn't hear from my mother again, but the calls came in from everyone else, distant relatives, family friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years. They all had the same message. Why was I doing this? Why was I causing so much trouble? Ethan was already working his charm, painting me as the villain. I could hear it in their voices. They had already made up their minds. I was the one who had caused all this drama. I was the one tearing the family apart. Ethan was the innocent one, the victim. I could already feel the isolation creeping in. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the weight of it all bearing down on me. I had lost everything. My parents, my family, my sense of belonging. And for what? to protect a legacy that no longer existed, to fight for something that I would never have. I didn't know if I could keep doing this, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't just walk away. I had come too far. If I didn't fight now, I would lose everything to Ethan and his lies. The next morning, I received a call from my lawyer. He had been helping me with some of the legal work related to the family business, but today his tone was different. There was an urgency in his voice that I hadn't heard before. "You need to come in," he said. "Ethan's lawyer has filed a petition. They're trying to take full control of the estate and the business." I froze. I had known this was coming, but hearing it out loud made it real. Ethan was moving fast. He was trying to bury me, trying to erase everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed. "Can they do that?" I asked, my voice tight. "It's going to be a battle, but yes," my lawyer replied. "He's already moving assets, hiding accounts. He's trying to make it impossible for you to claim anything." The betrayal burned hotter than before. Ethan wasn't just playing dirty. He was fighting to destroy me, to bury me so deep that I couldn't climb out. I hung up the phone and sat there, motionless. It felt like the walls were closing in on me. I had known Ethan was ruthless, but this was next level. He wasn't just after money. He was after control. He wanted to crush me, to take everything from me and leave me with nothing. But I couldn't let that happen. I wasn't going to let him destroy everything. The fight was on. I couldn't sit still anymore. Every minute that passed felt like another hour of my life slipping away. Another second wasted as Ethan spun his web of lies around our family, around everyone I had ever known. I had tried to handle things quietly, keep the family's business intact, but Ethan had forced my hand. He had declared war, and now I was in the middle of it, no longer able to pretend like everything would be okay. I'd spent the last few days gathering what little support I could. The lawyer was on my side, but even he could only do so much. The rest of the family had sided with Ethan. Everyone else was either too scared or too loyal to see the truth. The will had been the first blow, but Ethan's manipulations were the real weapon. I had to go public. I had to expose him for who he truly was. That's when I made the decision. It wasn't a choice anymore. It was a necessity. I had to get the truth out there, even if it meant burning every bridge I had left. I spent hours at my desk, going through the evidence. The offshore accounts, the money transfers, the hidden deals, everything was right there. I knew that if I didn't act, Ethan would get away with it. He would sweep it all under the rug, and I would be the one left holding the mess. But if I went public, if I exposed him, there was no going back. No matter how much I hesitated, no matter how many times I tried to convince myself that there was another way, I knew deep down that this was the only option. Ethan would destroy me if I didn't destroy him first. I pulled up the folder on my computer, bank statements, email exchanges, even a few threatening messages I had uncovered during my investigation. It was all the proof I needed. I wasn't just going to tell my story. I was going to show the world the truth. And if my family couldn't see it, maybe the rest of the world would. My hands trembled as I clicked send. The document went live, uploaded to my social media accounts, a detailed expose of Ethan's criminal activities. I made sure to include every scrap of evidence I had, knowing that once it was out there, I couldn't take it back. I had crossed the point of no return. I felt sick to my stomach as I watched the post get shared, the comments piling in. The scandal was out, and there was no going back. I didn't even wait for the fallout. I couldn't. I had already seen the way my family had responded. Ethan had manipulated them all, and now he would use this against me. But I couldn't worry about that anymore. If I wasn't going to do this, no one else would. The hours that followed were a blur. I paced around my apartment, checking my phone every few minutes, refreshing the feed. The reactions were coming in fast. At first, it was disbelief. People didn't want to believe it. How could they? Ethan had always been the golden child, the family's shining star. The idea that he was a criminal seemed absurd. But slowly, as the evidence continued to spread, the reactions turned from shock to anger. And then, the first post appeared, a message from Ethan's business partner, a man who had been involved in some of the deals I had exposed. It was a damning statement, confirming everything I had said. Within hours, the story was everywhere. News outlets picked it up. The article I had posted went viral. People started commenting on my post, supporting me, some even offering their help. The public backlash against Ethan started to grow, but I knew the worst was yet to come. Ethan was powerful. He had connections that I didn't have, and he wouldn't go down without a fight. I didn't have to wait long to see his response. It came through on my phone as a message from his lawyer. "You've made a huge mistake," the message said. "The evidence you've shared is incomplete and false. You're going to regret this, and we'll make sure the entire world knows it." I wasn't surprised. Of course, he would deny it. He had denied everything before. But this time, the evidence was too overwhelming. There was no way out for him now. The calls started flooding, and soon after. First, my mother, then my father's side of the family. They didn't care about the truth. They cared about their reputation, about what the world would think of them. They were angry, furious at me for airing the family's dirty laundry. They didn't care about the illegal activities Ethan had been involved in. They cared about how this would make them look. And the more they called, the more I realized how truly alone I was. "Why are you doing this to your brother?" My mother's voice trembled on the other end of the line. "You've ruined everything. This is all going to end in disaster. Ethan is your family. He's been there for you. You have to stop this." "I didn't ruin anything, Mom," I replied, my voice steady but cold. "I'm not the one who's been lying to you all. I'm not the one who's been taking our family's money and hiding it. Ethan is the one who's been ruining everything. And if you can't see that, then maybe it's time we finally face the truth." There was a long silence, and when she spoke again, her voice was small, defeated. "I can't believe this. I don't know who you are anymore." I hung up before I could say anything more. I didn't need to. She had already made her choice. Ethan had already won her over, just like he always did. I checked my phone again. There were hundreds of comments now, but none from Ethan. The silence from him was deafening. He was probably sitting in his mansion, surrounded by lawyers, trying to figure out how to turn this around. But no matter how many people he paid off, no matter how much money he threw at the problem, it wouldn't change the truth. And the truth was out. There was no taking it back now. But even as the story spread and the world began to turn on Ethan, I couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was coming. He would fight back. He would do whatever it took to bury me. And I had no idea how far he was willing to go. The public spectacle had just begun, and as much as I wanted to believe that the truth would set me free, I knew it would come at a cost. And I wasn't sure I was ready to pay it. The silence from Ethan was becoming unbearable. For the first few days after I went public, I checked my phone obsessively, waiting for his response. But there was nothing. No messages. No calls. Not even an angry text. I had expected him to lash out immediately, to try and defend himself. But nothing. His radio silence only made my suspicions grow. Ethan was a man of action, always ready to manipulate, always eager to defend his image. So why was he so quiet? I could feel it in my gut. Something was off. And then the call came. I was sitting at my desk, trying to sift through the endless stream of messages and media requests that had flooded in. My phone buzzed, and I glanced down to see a number I didn't recognize. I answered on instinct, my heart racing. "Mr. Walker?" A deep, unfamiliar voice came through the line. "Yes," I replied, my tone guarded. "This is Detective Jenkins with the Los Angeles Police Department," the voice continued. "I'm calling regarding an ongoing investigation that involves your brother, Ethan Walker. We've come across some concerning information that we need to discuss with you." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Investigation? What the hell was going on? I hadn't heard anything about any investigations into Ethan. And even though I'd exposed his illegal activities, I never imagined it would escalate like this. "What investigation?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. "We've been looking into a series of financial transactions tied to your brother's company," Detective Jenkins explained. "What you uncovered about the money laundering is just the tip of the iceberg. There are several international accounts, large sums of money being moved through shell companies, and a pattern that suggests your brother may be involved in far more than just financial crimes. We're talking about organized crime, Mr. Walker." My world spun. I had known Ethan was shady, but this was worse than I could have ever imagined. Ethan had always been sly, always skated by, but I never thought he was involved in something this deep. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, confused. "Shouldn't you be questioning him?" "We've tried," Detective Jenkins replied. "But your brother has been difficult to pin down. He's evasive. He's covering his tracks. And what's more, we found connections that tie him to some dangerous individuals. We think he may be using the business as a front for laundering money for criminal organizations. The words echoed in my mind. Criminal organizations. I felt my stomach drop to the floor. Ethan had been playing a dangerous game, and now I was tangled up in it whether I liked it or not. "I need your help, Mr. Walker," the detective continued. "We believe you may have access to some of the documents that could help us piece together what he's been doing. We've already seen evidence of your brother's involvement in shady dealings, but we need more to fully expose him. I know this may be hard for you to hear, but your brother is much more dangerous than you realize." I felt the blood drain from my face. This was no longer just a fight for control of the family business. This was about something bigger, something far more sinister. Ethan had gotten himself entangled in a criminal network, and now I was caught in the fallout. What do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "We need you to keep your eyes open," Detective Jenkins said. "You're in close proximity to him. If he makes any moves, we need to know. If you can gather any more evidence, documents, accounts, anything that might tie him to these criminal activities, it could help us build a case." I stood there, the phone pressed to my ear, unsure of how to react. I had been so focused on my personal revenge, on exposing Ethan for what he had done to the family, that I hadn't even considered the depths of his criminal actions. I had uncovered a small portion of his deceit, but this was something I wasn't prepared for. "I don't know if I can do that," I admitted. "You don't understand. He's my brother. I've spent my whole life trying to protect this family, even when he didn't deserve it. I can't just bring him down like this." "Mr. Walker," the detective said, his tone firm but sympathetic. "I understand this is difficult, but your brother is playing a dangerous game, and he's dragging you into it. We need to stop him before it's too late. The longer he operates, the more people he hurts, including you." I paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. For the first time, I realized that exposing Ethan wasn't just about revenge. It was about protecting myself, my family, and even my future. If I didn't act, if I didn't stop him now, he would destroy everything. "I'll do what I can," I finally said, my voice resolute. "But I need more time. I'll keep watching him. I'll get you what I can." "Thank you, Mr. Walker. We appreciate your help. But remember, this isn't just a family matter anymore. This is bigger than that." The call ended, and I stood there, staring at the phone in my hand. My mind was racing. I had to act fast. Ethan was involved in something far beyond anything I could have imagined. And now I was in the thick of it. I had a choice. I could continue with my plan, expose Ethan for his financial crimes, or I could dig deeper into the criminal activities he was involved in. The truth was, if I didn't expose him for everything, if I didn't bring down his empire, he would drag me down with him. There was no escaping it. I started digging through the documents again, this time with a new purpose. The evidence I had gathered before wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed the kind of evidence that would make it impossible for Ethan to wriggle out of this, that would expose his criminal network for all to see. The next few days were spent scouring through every contract, every financial record. The more I uncovered, the worse it got. Ethan had been moving money across borders, hiding it under fake businesses. He had been involved in multiple international deals, all tied to illegal operations, drug trafficking, black market deals, and even human trafficking. My stomach churned with every new revelation. And then I found it. A list of names, individuals linked to known criminal organizations. Ethan had been working with some of the most dangerous people in the world, and now I had their names, their connections. This was my opportunity to finally take him down. But I couldn't do it alone. I had to go to the authorities. I had to expose Ethan for what he truly was. More than a thief, more than a liar. He was a criminal, and I would stop at nothing to bring him down. But even as I made the decision to take action, I couldn't shake the fear in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't just about exposing Ethan anymore. It was about survival. And I had no idea how far he would go to make sure I didn't succeed. I could feel the weight of the world pressing down on me as I sat at my desk, staring at the pile of documents in front of me. Each one was a thread in the web that Ethan had spun, a web that I had been unwittingly tangled in for years. The more I uncovered, the more disgusted I became with myself. How had I not seen it before? How had I been so blind to his manipulations, to the dark world he had built around our family? The detective's words echoed in my mind. This is bigger than you think. They weren't just words. They were a reality that was becoming impossible to ignore. Ethan wasn't just a spoiled son who had been handed everything on a silver platter. He wasn't just a brother who had always overshadowed me. He was a criminal, involved in things that I couldn't even begin to understand. And I was implicated in it all, whether I liked it or not. I had a choice to make. The plan had always been to expose Ethan for his illegal activities, to bring him down in front of the world. But now, with the weight of the truth pressing against me, the decision wasn't so simple. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It wasn't just about getting even for the years of neglect, for the countless times I had been forced to step aside while he took everything. It was bigger than that. It was about survival. It was about stopping a dangerous man before he could drag me, and everyone else, into his world of corruption and lies. But I didn't know if I was strong enough to go through with it. The public reveal had been just the beginning. Ethan was furious, I knew that. But the real question was whether I could bring him down without destroying everything else in my path. I thought about the family, my mother, my father's side, the few people I still cared about. They were all being manipulated, blinded by Ethan's charm, his promises. If I exposed him fully, if I dragged everything into the light, I would lose them forever. The anger I felt towards them, towards my mother, who still defended him, was raw and suffocating. How could they not see? How could they stand by him while he destroyed everything? But then a small voice in the back of my mind whispered, what if you were wrong? What if, in your rage and your desire to finally take control, you were willing to burn down everything for the sake of a vendetta? What if exposing him meant losing everything you've ever worked for? The family legacy, the few ties you still have left. I had to make a decision, and I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. The phone rang, cutting through my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. It was the detective again. Mr. Walker, it's Detective Jenkins. We need to talk, he said, his voice tight. I've got new information, and you need to hear it. I felt my pulse quicken. New information? What could it be? Had Ethan been caught? Had he finally slipped up? What is it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, the weight of the situation settling heavily on my chest. I've been digging deeper, Jenkins replied, and I've uncovered something that changes everything. Ethan's not just connected to these international crime rings. He's also involved in a much larger operation than we realized. We found evidence that he's been working with people in high places, people who could ruin his life and yours if this goes public. And I'm talking about power players, Mr. Walker. Politicians, businessmen, people with a lot of influence. People who will stop at nothing to protect their interests. The words felt like a cold slap to my face. Power players? Politicians? This was no longer just a fight against Ethan. This was bigger than that. Much bigger. And the more Jenkins spoke, the more I realized how dangerous this situation had become. So what does this mean? I asked, my voice low. What are we supposed to do now? We need to act fast, Jenkins said, his tone urgent. You need to be careful. Ethan's involved in something far more dangerous than we initially thought. And now, he has friends in very high places. If we expose him, it could bring down a lot more than just your family. It could shake the foundations of everything he's built. And it might even bring down people who are untouchable. But the more we wait, the more it's going to cost. I sat back in my chair, the weight of his words sinking in. People who are untouchable. My hands trembled as I gripped the phone, trying to process everything. I had known Ethan was dangerous, but I hadn't realized just how far-reaching his web had become. Now, it wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't just about taking back what was mine. It was about something more, something that could change the entire course of my life. I closed my eyes, trying to clear my head. This wasn't the world I had signed up for. I hadn't asked for any of this. But now, it was here, and I had to make a choice. The truth was, I didn't know if I was strong enough to take Ethan down. I didn't know if I had the courage to face the storm that was coming. But what I did know was this. I couldn't let him get away with this. Not again. I took a deep breath and set the phone down. My mind raced with the choices in front of me. I had to expose him, but I also had to protect myself. The stakes were higher than I had ever imagined. This wasn't just about a family business. This was about power. This was about survival. I thought about my options: going public, risking everything I had left, or playing it safe, letting Ethan continue his life of lies. There was no easy way out, but there was one thing I knew for sure. I wasn't going to back down. I had to act, but I needed to be smart. I couldn't just rush into this. If I exposed Ethan too soon, I'd lose everything. But if I waited too long, I risked him destroying me first. I walked to the window, looking out at the city below. The world had become a different place in the past few weeks. Nothing was the same anymore. I wasn't the person I had been before. The man I had been before my parents died, before Ethan's betrayal, was gone. Now, I had to figure out who I was going to be in this new world. And I knew that the only way to find out was to keep moving forward. The time had come. I had tried to avoid it, tried to reason with myself that there might still be a way to stop this without causing the destruction I knew was inevitable. But now, as I stared at the evidence spread across my desk, everything Ethan had done, everything he'd stolen, everything he'd lied about, there was no more doubt in my mind. I couldn't walk away anymore. The decisions I had made had led me to this moment. There was no turning back. The phone call had come in the morning, just after I had gone through the last bit of financial data from the accounts I'd uncovered. Ethan was circling, preparing for his next move, and I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. I had to confront him head on. No more secrets, no more half-truths. I needed to expose him in front of everyone, show him that I wasn't the weak, passive one anymore. I dialed the number I knew by heart, the number I had been avoiding for days, weeks. Ethan's. It rang twice before he picked up, his voice smooth and casual as always. "What do you want?" "I need to see you," I said, keeping my tone cold. No small talk, no pleasantries, just business. "What for?" he asked, his voice dripping with that same arrogance. "It's time for us to have a conversation," I replied. "In person. You know where I am." There was a pause. Then, in his usual confident way, he said, "Fine. I'll be there in an hour." I hung up without waiting for him to speak again. The air in my apartment felt thick, suffocating. Every moment seemed to stretch on forever. I had a plan, but it wasn't going to be easy. I wasn't just going to confront Ethan with the evidence. I had to make sure he couldn't worm his way out of it. He had always been good at talking his way out of things, spinning lies and half-truths to make everyone around him believe that he was the victim. But this time, I wasn't going to let him do that. I stood up from the desk and walked to the window, looking down at the city below. It was a beautiful day, sunlight spilling over the skyscrapers, people going about their business, completely unaware of the storm that was brewing. But inside me, everything was different. I could feel the storm within me building, the anger, the fear, the anticipation of what was to come. One way or another, it was all going to end today. The doorbell rang, cutting through my thoughts. I jumped, then straightened myself out before walking to the door. I took a deep breath before opening it. Ethan stood there, his usual self-assured smile on his face. "Well, you actually called me here," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. He looked around, taking in the space as if he owned it. The arrogance, the entitlement, it was infuriating. "You've been hiding behind a lot of lies, Ethan," I said, my voice steady but filled with anger. His smile faltered for a second, but then he recovered, his gaze sharp and calculating. "What are you talking about now? I'm done playing your games. I've got enough to deal with as it is. You think you've got it all under control, don't you?" I stepped closer to him, the tension between us rising. "You've been playing this game for years, Ethan, but you've made a mistake. You underestimated me." He let out a low laugh, though it lacked the usual confidence. "You think you've won? You think you can just drag me down with your little crusade? It's too late for you. You're just bitter because you didn't get what you think you deserve." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my calm. He was trying to provoke me, to make me slip up, but I wasn't going to fall for it. "I know what you've been doing," I said, pulling the stack of documents from my desk and slamming them onto the coffee table in front of him. "The accounts, the money laundering, the criminal organizations. I know everything, and now the world is going to know too." Ethan's expression darkened. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something other than smugness, something closer to fear. He glanced at the papers, his eyes darting over the contents as if they were burning him. "You think anyone will believe you?" he spat. "You're the one who's going to be left with nothing. I'll make sure of it. I'll destroy you, just like I always should have." My heart raced, but I stood firm. "You've already destroyed yourself. All of this, your empire of lies, is crumbling. The truth is out there now, Ethan. And no matter how much you threaten me, it won't change that." He reached for his phone in his pocket, his fingers moving quickly over the screen. "You have no idea what you're getting into," he said, barely masking the panic in his voice. "This isn't over. I have people who will take care of this. People who will make sure you regret ever crossing me." I didn't flinch. "Who, Ethan? The criminals you've been working with? The people who are already onto you? You're out of your depth now." I could see the wheels turning in his head. He knew he was cornered. The smugness was gone, replaced with the cold calculation of a man who had finally realized the consequences of his actions. He was used to controlling situations, bending people to his will. But he had never expected me to fight back. Not like this. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than to me. "You're making a mistake. You should have stayed out of it." I couldn't, I said. "I couldn't stand by while you destroyed everything. You've taken enough from this family. And now, you'll answer for it." There was a long silence between us, the tension thick in the room. I could see Ethan's resolve faltering, his mind racing for a way out. But there was no escape this time. He had pushed too far, and I had finally had enough. "Make your move, Ethan," I said, my voice steady. "But know this, no matter what you do, I'm not backing down. This ends today." He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes burning with anger and fear. And then, finally, he spoke, his voice low and trembling. "I'm not going down without a fight," he said. I nodded, ready for whatever came next. The final battle was here, and I wasn't going to lose. This was it, the moment where everything would change, and I was ready to face it. The silence between us was suffocating. Ethan sat there, his face buried in his hands. A man who had spent his life hiding behind lies, manipulations, and privilege, now crumbling under the weight of the truth. I could hear his breathing, shallow and quick, the once confident man reduced to a trembling shell. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when he would finally have to face what he had done. And yet, there was no satisfaction in seeing him broken, no victory in watching his empire fall apart. There was only relief, a quiet, growing relief that I wasn't a part of this anymore. I was free. I let him sit there for a moment, letting the weight of the truth sink into him. I didn't need to say anything more. I had already said everything I needed to. Ethan had been exposed. His empire had crumbled. The family he had deceived and manipulated for so long now saw him for who he really was. Finally, Ethan looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with something close to desperation. I can't lose everything. Please, please don't do this to me." His voice broke, and for the first time, I saw the man behind the arrogance. The man who had always controlled everything, who had never once questioned his right to have it all, now begging for mercy. But this wasn't about mercy. This wasn't about saving him. I crossed the room slowly, my heart steady, my resolve unshaken. "You never cared about any of us, Ethan. Not really. You care about power, about getting what you wanted. You used this family, used me, used our parents. You took everything, and now it's over. You don't get to ruin us anymore. You don't get to control anything anymore." He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand, stopping him. No more excuses. No more lies. I stood in front of him, looking down at the man who had once been my brother, and felt nothing but a cold detachment. The man I had once respected, even admired, was gone. He had replaced him with someone I barely recognized, someone unworthy of my pity. "I'm done with you," I said, my voice as cold as I could make it. "And I'm done with this family. I'm not going to fight for a place at your table anymore. I'm not going to play the role of the good son, the one who gets overlooked while you take everything. I'm not going to chase after something that's been poisoned by your lies." I turned away from him, my back straight and my steps deliberate. Every muscle in my body told me to leave. I had been fighting this battle for so long, and it felt like the first breath I had taken in years. I could walk away now. The fight was over. But as I reached the door, I stopped. I glanced back at Ethan, who hadn't moved. His face was still frozen in that same expression, half angry, half broken. But something else had changed. I could see it now. He was scared, not for his future, but for what he had lost. The trust of everyone who had once believed in him. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Ethan," I said, my voice softer now, though the bitterness remained. "But it won't be me. Not anymore." I walked out of the room, the door closing behind me with a soft click. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was leaving a part of myself behind. I was finally walking away from the person I had been, someone who had allowed himself to be controlled by guilt, by family, by duty. The man who walked out of that door was someone new, someone who could breathe, who could live without the weight of everyone else's expectations on his shoulders. I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. In the days that followed, the fallout from my exposure of Ethan's criminal activities rippled through our family. The media picked up the story, the world now seeing the man behind the mask for the first time. My family, those who still hadn't seen the truth, had to reckon with what Ethan had done. They had to come to terms with the betrayal, the lies, the manipulation that had been happening right under their noses for years. The authorities were involved, of course. Investigations were launched. Ethan was arrested, finally held accountable for his actions. It didn't happen overnight, but it didn't matter. It wasn't the arrest that mattered to me. It wasn't the punishment that would finally make him pay. It was that he could no longer control anyone. He could no longer hide behind his wealth or his connections. The truth had been exposed, and there was no running from it. But the cost of exposing him was more than I could ever have imagined. The family, what was left of it, was destroyed. My relationship with my mother, with my father's side of the family, gone. They had all chosen him, had all turned their backs on me for too long. And when the truth came out, they couldn't handle it. My mother, who had always been my rock, couldn't see the man I had become. She saw only the son who had betrayed her other son. And I realized then that maybe, just maybe, Ethan wasn't the only one who needed to change. I needed to walk away from them too. I had spent my entire life trying to please people who would never appreciate what I did for them. People who would always choose the path of convenience over the hard truth. So I made my choice. I started over. I rebuilt my life from the ground up. It wasn't easy. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I had control over it. For the first time in my life, I felt free. Months passed, and slowly, my life began to take shape. I started a new career. I made new friends, people who saw me for who I really was, not the person I had been forced to become for the sake of family. And every day, I walked away from the past, from the hurt, from the betrayal. It wasn't just a physical distance. It was emotional, too. I stopped looking back, stopped holding on to something that had never truly been mine. One afternoon, while I was out for a walk, I saw an old friend from my childhood. They asked me how I was doing. I smiled, genuinely, for the first time in what felt like forever. "I'm good," I said. "I'm finally good." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it.